Welcome to Ask GMBN Tech. This is our weekly Q&A show. Get your questions in the comments below. Use the hashtag AskGMBNTech, or alternatively, you can email your questions in to the email address right there. First up this week is from James Doyle. Hi Doddy, can you explain rear shock sizing and can you install a larger travel shock on a bike? There's quite a lot to explain here really. Well, first up, look at this shot of a shock, right? So there's two real measurements on a shock. There's the eye-to-eye length of the shock, and then there's the shaft stroke travel. So you'll often hear of a shock being referred to as, say, a 200 eye-to-eye and a 57 stroke. So the eye-to-eye refers quite simply by the measurement between the two eyelets, end to end on the shock. And that refers to if it's actually going to fit in a specified space on a certain type of suspension bike. The next measurement refers to the actual shaft travel of that shock. And then within those two measurements, there are different variations. Now, depending on the layout of a frame, you're going to have a certain amount of space in which you can put that shock. And obviously a certain amount of travel the shock can have, and that directly correlates to the amount of rear wheel travel. So this is how frame designers decide how they want the bike to ride and how they want it to actually feel out on the trail. So you'll often hear the term leverage ratio applied when bikes and manufacturers are talking about the back end of their bikes. So for example, if a mountain bike has got a 2-to-1 leverage ratio, for every millimetre that the shock operates, the rear wheel will move twice that. That is the 2-to-1 ratio. Nice and simple. Now, with that in mind, bike manufacturers spec a variety of different shocks to give their bikes different feels, and of course it all comes down to the suspension design of the bike as well, so there's lots to factor in there. Now, just for example, in an ideal world, a manufacturer would want to use a shock with the most amount of stroke possible on it, because it simply allows for more tuning and it's going to actually cope with what is happening at the rear wheel a lot more. Just for example, if you had a bike that had 200 millimeters of rear wheel travel, so like a downhill bike, if it had a little shock on it that only had 40 millimeters of stroke, that shock is going to be working incredibly hard. The oil in there is going to heat up, and as a result of that, the damping is going to be quite erratic. It's going to be all over the place. Whereas if it had a shaft travel of 57 millimeters or even longer than that, the longer the shaft is, the more oil that's in there, the better that the shock is going to cope with it. It's all about finding the best compromise. Now, with shock sizing itself, there's what we now call the metric system, which is pretty much commonplace on most bikes now, and certainly all bikes going forwards. Once upon a time, shocks would come in a whole bunch of different varieties. I think it was about 9 different options, something like that. But the point is that they were all unusual lengths and they didn't really correspond to the shaft travel, and it was a bit all over the place. So the metric system, basically what it does is simplifies this and takes it down to about 6 options. So there's far less options there, and within those options there actually offers a chance for manufacturers to spec a more consistent shock that offers more to the consumer and obviously to the manufacturer's bike to make sure it rides appropriately. Effectively, it gives the manufacturers a bit more freedom because they do know that whatever shock length they spec in metric, in theory, it should perform exactly as well as any of the other shock sizes. It's just they pick the size that correctly fits the bike design they have. As for just chucking in a shock with a longer stroke length into your bike, yeah, you can technically do that, but there's a few things to bear in mind. Now, firstly is if it extends the back end of your bike, there's a good chance that the shock could hit your seat tube, or depending on the design of your bike, part of the frame could contact that's not supposed to contact. You don't need me to tell you that's not a very good thing to happen. And then of course, with having more travel, you might find the wheel strikes the frame, your saddle, or even parts of the frame strike each other that there would have been a nominal amount of clearance to cope with previously. So if you do want to do that, just take that into consideration. Now also, if your bike does cope with that and does allow you to put a longer shock in there to get that more travel, and it's not going to hamper it, you might find that it tweaks your geometry and you're not going to like the way it rides, because it could make your bottom bracket too high, which in turn would steepen your head angle, it would steepen your seat angle. There's various different effects of doing this. My recommendation, stick with the correct length shock for your bike. Okay, next up, forgive me if I can't pronounce this, Bartłomiej Kazmierczak. Hope that's right, or even close to it would be good. Hi Doddy, is it worth upgrading aluminium handlebar and seatpost to carbon on an XC hardtail bike? I'm worried about durability when riding in the mountains. Yes and no. You're going to get not that much more performance. Well, from the seat post, there won't really be any performance upgrades. You might lose a little bit of weight, but for regards of durability, the alloy post is definitely going to be better. Carbon bar, again, you might lose some weight, but actually there are some performance benefits to running a carbon bar, and that's comfort. Lightweight carbon handlebars do absorb some of that buzz you get out on the trail. But of course, if you're crashing or there's any chances your bike's going to be grinding against any rock or anything like that, then there is a chance it's going to get damaged easier, certainly, than aluminium. Perhaps I would look at doing some upgrades in other area of your bike instead, using that same money. Alright, next up is a geometry related one from the imaginatively named Septum Roptum. Can you put a 27.5 inch on a 29? Yeah, of course you can. It's definitely going to have some adverse effects though. So first up, your bottom bracket height. So on a 29 inch wheel bike, obviously your bottom bracket is going to be higher off the deck. So by putting 27.5 inch wheels on it, it's going to be slammed. So your cranks are going to be so close to the ground, you can be hitting them all the time. So not good from that respect. Next up is you're going to have some steering problems. So there's two things you'll often hear talked about. One of those is offset and the other one is trail. In fact, you'll hear trail referred to less. So the offset is the distance your fork axle is based in front of that steering axis. So imagine drawing a line all the way through your head tube, all the way down to the axle. You'll find quite often the axle is stepped forwards. That is your offset, and you can get different offsets on different forks. And that tends to happen by getting a different crown steerer unit, because that's where the offset actually happens, as opposed to happening at the actual bottom of the fork there. Now there's also a measurement called trail. Now trail is a distance between the tyre contact patch on the ground and that vertical line going all the way through your head tube where it meets the ground there. One of the problems you have with 29 inch wheel bikes is as your axle gets higher off the ground, the trail measurement basically increases. So what they used to do was change the offset in order to bring it back again. So by putting smaller wheels on your bike, your handling is going to go all over the shop. Next up, your chainstay length is going to feel pretty wacky by putting a smaller wheel in there. The effect is basically by having a bigger wheel in there, it makes the chainstay feel shorter. By putting a smaller wheel in there, it makes it feel longer. The longer the chainstay is, the more weight you have to pull back on the bars in order to lift the front wheel off the ground. As a benefit though, it does put your body weight further in the middle of the two axles of the bike. I personally quite like a long chainstay, but it's definitely going to change the way your bike feels. Now back in 2014, there's a couple of riders at the Mega Avalanche, both riding on the Commencal team. One of them was Nico Quay and the other was Pierre-Charles Georges. Now they were both running 650B Commencal bikes at the time, but the mud that year was so bad that they both swapped to 26 inch wheels in order to get through the frame. But you've also got to bear in mind that the difference between 26 inch wheels and 650B is a lot closer than 650B to 29 inch wheels. So I don't think you want to be messing around with that on your bike, but by all means, put some of your friends' wheels in and have a little play around. Next up's from SB. Is it bad practice to be sitting on the seat when the dropper is fully down? Sometimes I like pedaling around with the seat down, maybe when sessioning features for an hour or so, but I'm concerned that it might damage the dropper since it was designed for descents when you're supposed to be stood up. No, it's absolutely fine. Basically, dropper posts, what they do is they move oil from one chamber into another, and they have air basically that when you open the port, it allows the oil to flow back in, and the air basically helps it extend. It's a pretty simple system. Of course, there are intricate parts on the inside, but when it's lower and it's slammed down, you are absolutely fine to use it in that position. And in fact, you're okay to use it in other positions as well within there. Don't feel confined to using it fully extended all the time. So, job done. It's a dropper post. Enjoy it being dropped. Next up's from Mick Gearing. Hi Doddy, thanks to you and the team for providing us with great content. I love tuning in and learning new things every week. Thank you. Thanks Mick, I really appreciate that. My question is about volume spacers in forks and rear suspension cans. I'm on the slightly heavier side, but not too out of shape body-wise thanks to riding regularly again. At the moment, I find myself on the upper limits of the Fox 36 Performance Elite and the DPX2 Float Evol pressure charts for my bike. Will adding volume spaces to my suspension help in reducing how much PSI is needed for my targeted sag range between 25 and 30%, or are they primarily designed for getting the suspensions to ramp up quicker? Do I need to look into suspension products that cater for higher PSI requirements? My bike is a 2018 Giant Rain Advanced 1. PS, I'm riding as much as possible to continue reducing my weight to come back down in required PSI for the Fox gear on my bike. Okay, so there's a lot to this. So first up, Mick, let's look at the air pressure recommendations for your forks and shocks. So looking on the Fox site, they say the Evol equipped DPS and DPX2 shocks. They've got a maximum pressure of 350 PSI. So that's quite a significant amount of pressure putting into a shock, but something that you really need to take into account with this is the amount of damping that you're putting on that as well. So with more pressure put in a shock, you think it's stored energy. You really need to control that as much as possible. And that can have an effect on how the bike feels, even if it is slightly over-sagged. Now also take into account, this is Fox's recommendation here, that the pressure measured an ambient temperature of 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal operating temperature range of Fox products is 20 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Now Fox have got a pretty helpful way of checking the maximum amount of volume spaces, which will definitely help with your ride, because they do of course affect the end of the stroke and how it ramps up, but they do have a slight overall feel. And you do tend to have to run slightly less pressure with them. I'm talking maybe like 5 PSI, but it can be enough to make a difference. So if I was you, I'd definitely try ramping them up with as many volume spaces as you can per product. So I'm just throwing you a link on the screen now. Is a link to the Ride Fox website, and your forks and your shock will have a little four-digit ID code on them. So if you put that into the search product information bit, it will bring up all the information about your particular fork or shock. I'm guessing you probably know this because you have referred to the pressure charts, so it's like the next step up from that. But also the other thing to take into account is suspension design on bikes. Now your bike is a linkage bike, so for example a single pivot bike like an Orange, you're going to need to be a slightly lighter rider in order to use that over a linkage bike, just because of the amount of pressure you end up using in those shocks. I don't quite know what the max is on yours, but the truth is, it's something that you're going to need to play with yourself to get exactly right on there. I'm almost certain, whatever your weight, you can get the bike tuned in to feel just right for you, but it might require a little phone call for some tips to a dedicated suspension tuner, someone like Ride Fox UK or TF Tuned or Sprung over in the Forest of Dean, and there are a number of those in Europe, in Asia, in America, wherever you're based as well. I hope you can get that figured out. Sorry, it's a bit of a vague answer on there. Like, the volume spaces will definitely make a difference, but it's definitely something you're going to need to play with to see how they feel, because you might also not like the way that they change the characteristics of your bike. And there we go, there's another Ask GMBN Tech in the bag. If you've got any questions, add them in the comments below. If you've got any comments, add them in below as well. Please don't forget to subscribe to GMBN Tech and tell everyone about us. And we're going to be launching some really, really cool new content soon on the channel, so keep your eyes open for that. And don't forget to give us a thumbs up. And if you want another great GMBN Tech related video, right down there.